This video will be for the armhole facing. So this facing process is the same process that you would go through for any type of facing. Neckline, armhole, center front facing, which we will have as part of our collared shirt that we will do. So you'll need a front and back bodice, one of each. You will have a front and back armhole facing, and then the fusing pieces that go with each of those, front and back fusing. So these will be cut out of your fusible interfacing and attached to the other two facing pieces. So you can see here I have already fused my front and back armhole facing. We're ready to get started. Okay, so I'm going to construct my bodice and my facings separately before I'm ready to put those two together. So I'm going to set the facings aside for right now and construct the bodice. We will be putting front and back right sides together, stitching the shoulder at 1/2 inch and stitching the side seam at 1/2 inch. Those will get busted open in a minute, but I'm going to go ahead and construct my facing first. Okay, with our facing pieces, front and back should just both look like a J and backwards J shape. Put those right sides together, and then we will stitch the shoulder at 1/2 inch and the side seam down here at 1/2 inch. The curves of your J won't be the exact same, they won't match up, so don't worry about that. The front and back of your armhole are not the same shape. Okay, so I have both of those seams matched and pinned, and I'll stitch those at 1/2 inch each. Now we're ready to go bust open all of our seams. So each of these will get busted open, and each of the seams that we did on our bodice will also get busted open. Okay, this pressing arm is a nice tool to use for this point because you are working within a circle. So it's easy to slip it on there and press that open without getting creases in the rest of your pattern pieces. So there's my full facing constructed. Now my bodice. Again, just slip it on there, and that'll allow you to bust open those seams. And here's my little bodice constructed. Now we're ready to go pin these two together. To pin these together, I will turn my bodice right side out, and my facings will stay inside out. Those should slip over the hole or the arm's eye of your garment. And these should match up perfectly. So shoulder seams should match up at the shoulder area. On the front of the garment, there should be a single notch that matches up. Underarm seam will match up. And then a double notch on the back. After that, everything else should match up with no ease. So I can just align my raw edges and pin around the rest of my circle. Now we're ready to stitch this together at 1/4 inch. I'm going to start at my underarm seam so that my back stitch is hidden underneath the arm. So we can see that. And then just work my way around the circle at 1/4 inch. Connect your back stitch at the end of the circle to the previous back stitch where you began. Trim your threads. Okay, so that is fully stitched on. Now we're ready to do the 4 steps that we will do for all facings. Trim, So the first step is to trim your seam allowances. The facing seam allowance will sit closest to the body whenever the garment is finished. So that one needs to be the shortest. We'll trim it down to 1/8 of an inch. Okay. Now our next step is to clip. We will be pressing these seam allowances towards our facing side. They will be going from a smaller curved area into a larger curved area. So we will need to clip to allow them to spread as we press. So all the way around our arm's eye, we're going to clip through both seam allowances. Do this with the tip of your shears so that you have as much control as possible. You want to get close to your stitch line, but don't go through it. We're going to do that every 1/2 inch, going around the entire circle. The distance between your clips will vary depending on how steep your circle is. So this is quite a small, tight circle, which is why we're doing every 1/2 inch. If it was even smaller, we might do every 1/4 inch. Or if it's more of a shallow curve, you can do them a little bit further apart. Okay. Now we're ready to take this to our ironing board and press our seam allowances towards our facing side. Okay, so I will take my garment and pull my facings away from the garment so they're sticking off the edge. And then on the inside, get this fully turned inside out. I'm going to press those seam allowances towards my facing side. So slip that on your little arm to make it easier, and then go around. Make sure you really separate that facing from the garment, pulling it apart to get the flat side on the other side of your fabric. And then press both seam allowances over towards the facing. Just work your way around that circle. You can also do this on a ham at home if you don't have an arm like we do here. The hams you can purchase at Joann's, and they're less expensive than a pressing board like this one. So if you just stick your ham into the center of that circle, it can work just as well. Okay, so those Seams are now pressed over toward the facing side, and you can see here where they begin to spread at those slash points. Okay, now we're ready to understitch. To understitch, I'm going to leave my facing sticking off the edge, and I'll stitch just on top of those seam allowances right next to my previous stitch line. So my bodice should be out of the way. I shouldn't be stitching on it at all. So place that under your machine. I like to start at the underarm seam just to hide my back stitch underneath the person's arm. And then keep the rest of that facing out of the way and keep your bodice out of the way. And then I'll just rotate, working my way around the circle of my facing. Make sure that your facings stay pressed down the entire time. Since they've been clipped into, they tend to want to pop up on you. So I've got my finger just here in front of the foot, keeping them pressed down as I feed them underneath the foot. Connect your back stitch to the back stitch where you began so that it creates a full circle. And then trim your threads. Okay, now I've got a fully understitched facing from the outside. With my facing sticking off the edge, I should be able to see my seam with my understitch on top of the facing. The last step in this one will be to fold your facing to the inside of the garment. Stuff that facing inside so that you have a finished armhole edge, and now we will put that seam right on the folded edge and press. Okay, so using my arm again, I'm going to put that through my garment and then roll this seam so that the seam lands right on the folded edge. You'll press that going around the entire armhole. Okay, once you have that fully pressed, from the outside of the garment, you should just see a folded edge on the armhole. From the inside of the garment, you should see your facing, so the seam is right on the edge, understitch is right next to that seam, and then we've got our facing sitting on the inside of the garment. If this was a finished garment, the edge of my facing would either be serged or it would get attached to another piece of fabric like the lining, so that those raw edges are not just hanging out inside of our garment.